Hello, you're very welcome along to a special edition of the Matchbook Football Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, joined by Mark O'Hare and Miguel Delaney this week. And there's two big finals, both domestically and in Europe this week. So it would be remiss of us not to cover it on the Matchbook Podcast. So, firstly, we will be covering the Europa League final, which takes place on Wednesday night versus Sevilla versus Roma. And then the Manchester Derby, the big one, Manchester City versus Manchester United. Before we get going, if you are watching on the live stream, do hit that like button and get involved. And if you are watching the video back, do subscribe to the YouTube channel for free and hit that like button, as we said. But otherwise, you're here for the tips. Let's get straight into it. And we will start with Seville versus Roma. This takes place Wednesday, 8 o'clock. And we will take a look at the betting that we currently have on matchbook.com. We are recording this Tuesday morning. Seville are 2.92, Roma 3.0. The draw is available at 3.05. Both teams have scored. No is heavily favoured in this market at 1.75. The Asian handicap line is a draw no bet market with Seville slight favourites at 1.96. And the goal line, we were chatting about this off air, 1.5. But that is shaded a good bit towards the over, Miguel. So before we get going, and just in terms of a betting game, look, a lot of people would tune in for this final, having not really watched much of Serie A, let alone Roma in the Europa League. Miguel, just sum up Jose Mourinho over the last couple of years, because he hasn't been quiet in Italy, it's safe to say.
No, it's interesting. I mean, this is a game basically involving a lot of European heritage or football heritage or Europa League heritage. As Mourinho once said before another game involving Sevilla, that I suppose showcased one of the reasons he's in the Europa League now, not the Champions League. That was said when Sevilla knocked Manchester United out of the last 16, 5 years ago now. And I suppose since then, it has been relatively steady decline for me. Just something that, I mean, obviously this has been a longer debate in football, but it is something that happens to the best players. It happened to Giovanni Trapattoni. What happened to basically everyone but Alex Ferguson, which they go from the peak, and it's about, I suppose, then jobs just that level down every next time, and that's been the case with Mourinho and Roma. Given they have been, I suppose, a second tier club in that European ranking, which is reflected in the fact that his Europa Conference last year was their first ever European trophy. And their first trophy in 2 decades. But he has got on from that now to go to the final of Europe's second tier competition. The one, I suppose, that really launched him as an international star when he won it 20 years ago with FC Porto, beating Celtic in what was a genuinely brilliant final. This is up against the issue here. While Mourinho has never lost a European final, he's up against, well, a team, with genuine Europa League heritage in Sevilla, the competition's most successful ever club. They just seem to have an aura about them. And even like this season has been remarkable. Previously, people would have put it down to Emery. I think Lopetegui's victory in 2020 showed it was about more than that. It was about something to do with the club. And here they are again, having changed their manager twice this season. Before another game with Manchester United, that has been the launchpad now for another remarkable run where they keep defying the odds. And it does mean there's a lot in this match, a lot of strands going into, I think, a really engaging game, clash of forces in that way. And also very, very different form, but I'm sure we'll come on to that. But certainly, a manager who doesn't lose European finals against a club who doesn't lose Europa League finals.
Yeah, that's well set up from Miguel, Mark. A little bit on Roma again. Look, their season that's kind of tailed off. Jose Mourinho was definitely focused on the Europa League over the last 5 or 6 games. They were in the hunt for a Champions League spot automatically in the top 4 in Serie A. So for those again that aren't quite tuned into Serie A, what has happened in those last 6-7 games? Is it just been purely that Jose's prioritised the Europa League final?
Yeah, in a nutshell, I would completely ignore all the Serie A results and performances over the last month because he's made no sort of bones about it. The Europa League and winning the Europa League is, in his view, was the best strategy to get into the Champions League next year. He felt even before Juventus had their points deduction that it was going to be too tall a task to compete on both fronts, basically. So he has totally prioritised Europe, and you'll see that in his team selections in recent weeks where, some of them have been sort of a half-assed kind of first 11, if you like. But, at the weekend, going into that game, I looked at it and thought there's an opportunity there for Roma. But he's no interest in picking up domestic points at the minute. It's all about this final, completely all in. And Sevilla, I'd say probably to a similar level, at least in the last fortnight or so. I think they've realised that kind of getting into Europe is still possible in La Liga, but it's obviously got much more difficult now in recent weeks. But they've also had their eyes on this prize as well. And I mean, I think Sevilla Miguel set up perfectly for both clubs, really. But just to look at Sevilla, really, you've got Mourinho, first of all, who's obviously the final king, really. He's won 13 of his 16 finals across domestic and European football, including all 5 in Europe. Obviously got that tattoo on his arm after winning the Conference League last year as being the first and only guy to win all 3 major European trophies. He's very proud about that. He wants everyone to know about that. And then you got Jose Luis Mendilibar now at Sevilla, who's their 3rd coach of the campaign. Obviously, Lopetegui left in October. Sampioli couldn't get a tune out of that squad. But Mendilibar came in. He's engineered a magnificent kind of upturn. Sevilla were in the midst of a relegation battle before his arrival, but they're comfortably clear of the relegation now. They've only lost twice under his watch. And he is the complete opposite, really, of a Mourinho. He's a very kind of, well, he's quite a calm character, if you like. He's 62 years old, and he's never won a major trophy as a player or a coach. He's been historically seen as more of a kind of promotion specialist and more of a firefighter, if you like, with lower ranked clubs. His A-Bar team in particular, basically in the last couple of years, were probably more kind of suited to what a Mendilibar type is, rather than sort of carrying Sevilla to a Europa League final. And as Miguel said, he's done this in dramatic fashion. You know, that dramatic comeback at Old Trafford, and then steamrollering United in Spain, and then going through to the semi-finals, where I thought Sevilla were absolutely fantastic away at Juventus and deserved to win that game, but they conceded very late on in stoppage time, then progressed in extra time. But yeah, they believe this is their competition, this is their trophy. They believe their club is a divine right, really, to win this. So, and team news-wise, both teams will be pretty much close to full strength. Sevilla do have Marcos Acuna suspended. He's a bit of a hothead anyway, so I don't think they'll miss him massively with Alex Telles coming in, and a Roma of Chris Smalling back at centre-half, which just allows Brian Cristante to move into midfield, really. And Paulo Dybala has been the big sort of fitness concern in recent weeks, but he's trained in the last couple of days, so I expect him to be involved. Whether he'll start or not, I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm expecting a very competitive contest here between 2 teams with a real determination, a real confidence that they can actually go on and complete the job.
Okay, yes, the guys have set the game up well in terms of context. Miguel, we were laughing about the goal line there and how short it is. I don't know if I've ever seen 1.5 outside of internationals. But this is a special game, I guess, Europa League final with these 2 teams involved. Where are you looking for in terms of a bet, and how do you see the game unfolding?
I suppose we've got to go on terms of probabilities of what's going to happen, or really how the likely tactical context of the game and what will stem from that. And I suppose it feels like everything in this match is going to be dictated by Mourinho's approach to finals, which is, I mean, I suppose this is one of the things about Mourinho, and I was thinking about it. It was at that point, just I suppose, where there was the biggest debate over whether he was still the manager he had been, which was when he took Manchester United to the Europa League final in Stockholm in 2017 and played an Ajax team that were much younger and much more callow than United, and really actually a very different team to the Ajax one that got to the semi-finals of the Champions League 2 years later. And despite that, and despite United's superior strength, and this was emphasised by a kind of a coaching conference that Mourinho did later, when he spoke through his approach in the game, and it was all about stopping Ajax playing, and specifically Davinson Sanchez, who of course would go on to manage at Tottenham Hotspur. And this, I mean, well, that's a sort of approach that over the course of a season is probably why Mourinho, why he's not at the absolute elite clubs anymore, because that level is now all about systemized approaches, about imposing your game, basically kind of an evolution of the pressing possession style that has basically dominated the last decade, and to a certain degree, not rendered Mourinho obsolete, but ensured his methods are overtaken. That's good, and that's obviously better over the course of a season. But in a one-off game, something so forensic as this does give you that fighting chance. It's been the construction of Mourinho's career from from basically, I suppose, the first decade of the 2000s, when football was actually much more low scoring. But even now, in a game like this, it can just, I suppose, it's about percentage playing. And I think that's going to govern everything here, which is why it's difficult not to see this being a really tight game. And as regards kind of calculating what's possible from that, that's what it comes from. And I have to say, I was basically thinking about, well, I was thinking about any range of draws. I was thinking about 2 draws, 0-0 or 1-0. So, yeah, when you see draw at under 2.5 at 3.55, it feels like the obvious choice.
Yeah, it does seem the obvious choice, Mark. And it's one of those, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, when you're back in the unders, I guess. And if there's an early goal, it might sort of ruin it for you. But I just feel if there's an early goal here, the game sort of stays in the same flow that it would otherwise.
Yeah, I think the only way we don't get the kind of tight, tetchy game we're probably anticipating is if Sevilla score first, because, well, it depends when that goal arrives. But I think that will obviously push Roma and Mourinho a little bit more out of their comfort zone. But if Roma score first, then, I mean, everything we're talking about right now is probably going to be doubled and multiplied even further, because Roma are in the knockout phase of the Europa League. 8 games, all 8 have gone under 2.5 goals. 5 of those 8 have featured a maximum of just 1 goal. And anyone who saw the semi-final second leg against Leverkusen, you know, it was the full art really of Jose Mourinho, dogged and sort of diligent defending, but a ridiculous amount of time wasting and theatrics and gamesmanships, really. So, yeah, I think if Roma score first, Sevilla in trouble. And Sevilla, you know, whilst defensively they're capable, they're probably not on the same level as Roma. So I was slightly surprised to see them, you know, very, very, very slight favourites. But even still, I probably would give Roma the edge if I had to back a team to win the trophy. But in terms of the real odds and the bets here, the goal expectancy is just 2.15. And as you say, that's why under 2.5 goals is far too short to support. But, you know, low goal games tend to increase the likelihood of a draw. And so, you know, I'm quite enthused to see that the draw is the biggest price of the 3 major outcomes. At 3.05. Interestingly, 5 of the last 15 Europa League finals have been drawn in 90 minutes. And if we are to see a draw, it's very unlikely to be a 2-2 or a 3-3, is it? It's more likely to be a 0-0 or a 1-1. So I'm very much in line with Miguel in taking the 3.55 on the draw under 2.5 goals, basically covering the 0-0 and the 1-1. It's a very nice boost, even on a regular draw price. But I was also quite keen on the BTTS no option as well at 175, which you mentioned, Dan, because, you know, that does cover the 1-0 or the 2-0 either way. It's an approach we took at the Championship playoff final, paid out obviously the bigger price paid out on that occasion. So, you know, we're effectively covering all the likeliest low scoring options. But if you wanted just one bet for this match, it would be the 3.55 on the draw and under 2.5 goals. I think it's very fair considering the goal expectancy. And I think if you look towards the whole of the market, the best price you'll get on this match being decided on penalties is just 4-1. So that kind of gives you an idea of where the layers and the traders are expecting from this fixture.
I hadn't checked those odds across the board on the penalty shootout. That seems crazy to me, but just shows you what the expectancy is for this game. So the draw and under 2.5 goals, agreement from both Mark and Miguel. If you are having a bet on this game, 3.55. So looking forward to that game in Budapest tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. We will move to our second game, which is the FA Cup final on Saturday. It's 3 o'clock kickoff, brought forward due to policing here because it is the Manchester Derby. And we will take a look at betting, the early betting that we have on matchbook.com. The 90-minute markets, these will fill out as we get closer to kickoff. But Man City are available at around 1.54. United 6.4. The draw is 5.0. Opposite to the Europa League final here, both teams to score heavily favoured in this market at around 1.7. The Asian handicap line sees Manchester United get a 1.25 goal head start at 1.84. Where would you have got that a few years ago in a big final? And the goal line is 2.5, shaded towards the over at 1.63. Again, early prices, they will probably push out towards kickoff. Mark, I'll get you to set up this game for us. You've got Manchester City chasing the treble. You've got Erik ten Hag, who could have an unbelievable season if he manages to lift 2 cups as well as top 4. So set this game up for us if you can. It's going to be it's just a massive, massive occasion.
Yeah, so the Manchester Derby's been played 188 times in history, but this is the first ever meeting in a major cup final, really. So huge match. City, understandably, a short price favourite. They've won 4 of the last 6 meetings, including both in the Premier League this year. 6-3 and 2-1, but I think United have improved since then. The 6-3 obviously came quite early in Ten Hag's reign. I did think they improved thereafter. I thought they became a bit more of efficient and effective team rather than the sort of dominant and all-conquering Man City side, but they were effective. The big question now, I guess, for Ten Hag is can he translate his Old Trafford form for Manchester United into this fixture? Because away from home they have been, you know, iffy at best, really. At Old Trafford, they've been almost imperious, really. Easily the best defence in the league, an excellent points return as well. They only dropped 9 points and conceded 10 goals at Old Trafford in the Premier League all season, but away from home, just 8 wins. And they ended the season with just 7 points from the last 7 away games as well. So I think what's most concerning from a United perspective was that record away at the top 9, 7 defeats from 8 winless games. And the market never really did trust them in these big matches either outside of Old Trafford. As we remember, they went off outsiders at Wembley in the FA Cup semi-final against Brighton, a match they only had 39% of the ball, and they really sort of had to grind that game out to get to penalties. So I do have concerns about United, but I guess it's worth remembering this is a team which is full of quality operators really throughout the spine. De Gea is obviously questionable, but Varane's available. Casemiro's made a huge difference in the middle of that midfield. Bruno's recovered really well from the Anfield debacle. Rashford's had an incredible campaign really too. So they are dangerous. I don't expect them to be rolled over easily, but I think you still have to be sort of pro City because their top speed, their top level it's just a level that no one can match on this planet. And, they've rested and rotated since that Real Madrid incredible performance really in the second leg. And their big squad has kind of allowed Pep to do that, to keep his key players fit and fresh throughout the season. If you are nitpicking, I guess you could point as well to City's away record too, because against the same top 9, City have won just once on the road in their Premier League, which was at Arsenal. They scored 34 goals and 19 away, which is a decent total, but it's dwarfed by their Etihad record as well. And they weren't often demolishing teams on their travels. They're much more measured. And we saw that as well away in the Champions League. I know the first legs were away from home, so it required a different approach. But domestically, I think we have seen them occasionally have trouble sort of breaking down low blocks, occasionally having trouble moving the ball quick enough to penetrate teams, and occasionally Haaland's not been able to get into the game. So I think there is an opportunity for United here, but they have to be absolutely on point in terms of their game plan, their tactical approach, and they have to be incredibly efficient when they get those opportunities as well, because they do have the speed and the ability to hurt this Man City team. It is a cup final. It's a one-off match on neutral venue, so you can't just discount them because your City are, this all-conquering team on the way to the treble. However, as we get to, when I get to my best bet, I find it difficult not to be pro City.
Yeah, Man City under 4.5 goals, around even money. Mark O'Hare is looking at potentially. Won't give too much away ahead of the best bets. Miguel, over to you on this one. Erik ten Hag in general, what have you made of his first season? Because in some ways he's transformed the club, what he's done off the pitch. Cristiano Ronaldo, I think I read somewhere, I think he's 41 wins out of 60-ish games this season. Incredible record in some ways. In other ways, you look at that squad and say, is this not the bare minimum that Manchester United should be at? So where are you on that scale from one to the other?
I think broadly things are looking very positive. And that's, signposted by the trophy, the return to the Champions League, and perhaps another trophy. Obviously, within that, there's been some humiliations. It has to be noted. There's also been just a little bit of a debate occasionally about kind of some comparisons to Solskjaer's record, but I think that's kind of pointless again. And Ten Hag's a better manager with a better idea of football. And I think the one grand caveat you would say, if there are some kind of in that debate, is that what Ten Hag is basically trying to do is impose a new tactical idea on a team that essentially didn't have anything like that sort of coaching for years. So they're getting up to speed. That's an ongoing process. He doesn't have all the players he wants yet. I think they're still missing players who specifically understand that type of approach in key roles. And while it hasn't been perfect, it's been promising. But there's still an element of kind of, you wouldn't completely rely on this United yet. And it does feel like, as we've seen from some of these defeats, particularly the Liverpool one, given the form they went into that game on, it's almost touch and go whether they can produce a brilliant performance as they did, say, against Barcelona just before winning that League Cup, or suddenly it just falls apart on the day. And actually both games against City indicate that, with the grand caveat, of course, there, that they were dictated by this kind of variance in there, or this huge contrast in home form and away form. This is, of course, a neutral ground. And also, I do think the FA Cup, just the fact it's a final like this just does change the context as well. As you go into this game, given all momentum, all talk about City, it's just, and given what the kind of what the odds in advance of the match suggest, it's difficult not to think City would just roll them away. But I think there is enough there to kind of to maybe not be so gung ho. And in fact, I have to say, United's price was so high, given this is a one-off game, and this is given this is Manchester United, and they have beaten City already this season. That was almost attractive in itself. It didn't quite have the bravery to go for it. But I do think that while both of their games this season saw the two teams score, given how City have played, given the change to their tactical approach since that game, I think Ten Hag is going to play this a fair bit cannier. Not approach the game as we talked about Mourinho does, but certainly much more pragmatic. Maybe look to hit City on the counter a bit more. And I think the tension is going to be huge in this game, given the stake. I mean, for all that City have been freewheeling towards a title, there was kind of almost an inevitability about the title. Now this is a game they have to win. You know, it's a one-off, and you know if they don't get this, and that's the treble goes. Even of course the grander prize is the Champions League. Given how close they are to something historic, and given how associated this feat has been with Manchester United, their great rivals, there's been a symbolism to it, and that can affect the game as well. And I realise I'm going off a lot of kind of maybe the psychological input or the mood of the game, but I think that the history of the FA Cup final itself dictates the history of some of the games at Wembley dictates that. And for that, I'm almost kind of leaning towards a low-scoring 1-0 or 2-0. I could really go either way. So I'm actually thinking both teams to score no, because it's quite it's relatively high priced in the context, and I do think this could be a 1-0 either way.
It's an underdog in the mark, Miguel. Yeah, 2.22 currently both teams to score no. Mark, for you, I kind of mentioned earlier, so City under 4.5 goals is where you're leading. I guess taking some Miguel's point. Are you expecting Erik ten Hag to really sit in on this Manchester United? Because you look, I know it's a different case, but Arsenal went and tried to beat them with football at the Etihad and got well and truly battered. So there is that danger if you don't sit in that the game could be over after 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, I think it'd be foolish to kind of go after and chasing City. I think United do have strengths to play on the counter-attack, so that's how I see them approaching this match. But in terms of price, Brighton were as short as 2.15 to beat Manchester United at Wembley in the FA Cup semi-final come kick-off. So to see Manchester City at around 1.55, there's already a bit of interest there for me. So to back them at sort of even money by including under 4.5 goals, it's just too good to turn down, in my opinion. I know there's a kind of goals-based angle, and opposing goals in Man City matches isn't always the most fun to follow, really. But this is a cup final. They're rarely high scoring. And if City are, let's say, 2 or 3 goals to the good and controlling the contest after an hour, they will have an eye or half an eye on the Champions League final the following week. So, if City do sort of demolish United early doors, I don't expect them to play full throttle football for 90 minutes. I think there will be an opportunity for them to sort of rest, rotate, and maybe look ahead. So the win on the under 4.5 goals for me is just a tremendous boost on the straight City win, considering all the likely correct scores it covers: 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, 2-1, or 3-1. This is a cup final as well. 7 of the last 10 have gone under, as have 16 of the last 25 FA Cup finals. Only 2 of those 25 finals actually featured over 4.5 goals. And actually, if you look at the teams to win the FA Cup final in 90 minutes, just once since 1979 has a team winning alongside over 4.5 goals copped, and that was when Man City destroyed Watford 6-0 not so long ago, really. Do not expect a repeat of that. So I think it's an excellent price. I think whenever you get an opportunity to back City at evens with a decent amount of correct scores on your side, I think it's worth an interest.
Okay, yeah, Mark's going for City and under 4.5 goals at even money. Miguel expecting a cage again. Both teams score no, 2.22. Fascinating game coming up in Wembley on Saturday. We'll move to our long shot section. And Miguel, back to you on this one. So this is between the Europa League final or the FA Cup final, and you've gone for a correct score here. You were mentioned earlier the 0-0 or the 1-0, and you've sided with the latter there.
Yeah, completely. It's just, well, I mean, part of it was influenced by what Mark was saying as well. But that's, I think, just because it's a final, again, there'll be a sufficient opening or sufficient moment that there is one opening. Sorry, I should have put my.
We're right.
The nature of a day for a final like that. But yeah, and also I don't have sufficient faith in a Mourinho team in the way I would have even 3-4 years ago. I think they will concede, but in this Roma in Europe, he's had sufficient defiance in them to maybe respond. So in fact, I can almost see the game playing out like that. Sevilla scoring first, Roma responding, this going to extra time. But yeah, it is ultimately, it's one of those two low-scoring draws, and I've maybe gone for, in keeping with the entire season, I've gone for the one with a few more goals.
Yeah. And Miguel touched on Mark's selection here in the long shot section. So, Mark, you're telling people on Wednesday night to maybe, if they're out and about, take their time coming home, because this could go all the way to penalties.
No, rush home, because this is going to be tetchy, very competitive, and I'm expecting cars, I'm expecting low goals, expecting a few scuffles along the way as well. Hopefully, wouldn't be too surprised at all if we see extra time for all the reasons we've already outlined, really. And I think Roma in the knockout games already, it's just been typical Mourinho throughout this competition. He's not going to change his spots now, so a low-scoring game does look to be high on the menu, and therefore a draw is kind of brought into the thinking. So 2014 was the last 0-0 in the Europa League final, a match that did actually involve Sevilla as well. Before that, it was 2000. So perhaps we're due another one on Wednesday night. So yeah, happy to back the 0-0 for a big price, 8.2.
8.2 there. Yeah, do check those prices maybe an hour before kickoff in the match with Bet and Exchange. Invariably best price on the grid if you are looking for, I wouldn't say a fun interest bet, but if you are looking for an interest bet on the Europa League final. We will go to podcast best bets for this week. Mark, over to you for Man City and under 4.5 versus United. Before you make your case, one thing I did want to bring up in the preview of the game, City's last two games, do you take into account anything like that? The league was won, but they have, of course, dropped points to Brighton and then lost their unbeaten record to Brentford away.
No, I don't. I completely ignore. As soon as they've won the title, I have no interest in what Man City do, because they've rested, they've rotated, they've had eyes on these two finals now, because that's what it's all about for Man City. Losing at Brentford has no bearing on their season. So, yeah, happy to back them at evens with under 4.5 goals alongside. As I say, it takes into account all the likeliest correct scores if Man City are to win this match. FA Cup finals or finals of any sort are really high scoring, and finals are really sort of big blowout victories either. So as I outlined in the piece, I think Man City do have the credentials, Man United have the credentials to make life tough, be competitive in this match. But ultimately, I would back the best team on the planet to get the job done in 90 minutes against the Manchester United team that, outside of Old Trafford, have been questionable at best.
Yeah, looking forward to this game. City and under 4.5 goals versus Manchester United. Even money. It's at 3 o'clock. It's like old school FA Cup final. So hopefully big build up on the BBC and ITV as well, which also have the derby on that week. So big Saturday sport on ITV, and we'll be previewing that as well. So check out your podcast feeds. I digress. Miguel, on to you for best bet. It's the draw, which is very close to being favoured in this market, 3.05. It is still technically the underdog, and you're going for it here.
Yeah, just for everything we've said, and given the price in that, I think it's just it's inevitable. I mean, it does. I suppose it doesn't mean we're as dependent on any score, and the difference in price isn't that great. So I suppose it's that bit safer, I suppose, for something that bit likelier, and it's really hard to get away from. I mean, it does feel this is one that'll go right to penalties. Although I suppose one of the trends of this season, particularly with how Roma got here, is maybe late goals to deny us that. But of course, our late extra time goals to deny us that. But even that will be covered in this situation.
Yeah, draw 3.05 currently, Sevilla versus Roma. And if you missed any of the bets we put up here, insights.matchbook.com, the place to find that. My thanks to Mark and Miguel. We'll be back for one final time previewing West Ham's Conference League game as well as the Champions League final. So do check that out in your podcast feeds next week. Until then, enjoy the football both Wednesday night and Saturday night. We will chat to you next week. Bye-bye.